Hello, Namaste, Konnichiwa, welcome to Sunny Sensei. In this lesson, we are diving deep into project stakeholder management. I have prepared 25 questions to guide us through key concepts, from tools like Power Interest Grid, Stakeholder Cube, to techniques like co-creation, dynamic co-creation, and Salience model. Remember, this is not a test. Still, I suggest you grab a pencil and a notebook and keep a track of your answers. All right, let's get started with the first question. In a project to build a new office building, the local community has low power, low interest, and a negative attitude. What is the best way to manage this stakeholder group according to the stakeholder cube? All right, we have our four options. But before we get into these, let us have a quick look into the term stakeholder cube. It's a technique to classify stakeholders. The classification is based on three criteria. First, power, ability to influence the project. Second, interest, interest in the outcome of the project. Higher the interest, higher is the involvement in the project. The third one is attitude. This can range from negative to neutral to positive. For this problem, we have a stakeholder with low power, low interest, and a negative attitude towards the project. How do we deal with this stakeholder? Let us look at the options. A. Engage them frequently to try to change their attitude. The intention is good, but is this worth the effort? The stakeholder has low power. They don't have much influence on the outcome of the project. They also have low interest. It will be tough to engage them frequently. They are simply not interested. B. Monitor their concerns, but do not invest significant resources in engagement. This, to me, makes sense. Keeping an eye on this stakeholder is important. We should be aware of any changes in their stance. Doing this without committing too much efforts and resources looks like a good approach. Let me check other options before deciding on our choice. C. Ignore them completely as their power and interest are low. This is definitely wrong. Ignoring a problem is never a good idea. The positioning of the stakeholder might evolve with time. What happens if the stakeholder gains more power as the project progresses? Keeping an eye on every stakeholder is important. D. Involve them in all planning meetings to ensure they are heard. Again, is this stakeholder worth this intensive effort? Definitely not. They are low on power. This stakeholder is also low on interest. It is unlikely that the stakeholder will commit time for these meetings. We drop A, C, and D. B is our choice. Just to summarize, for stakeholders with low power and low interest, we simply need to keep an eye on such stakeholders. Monitoring is usually enough. If a stakeholder has neutral or positive attitude, periodic updates can be shared with the stakeholder. Light touch is the best approach. Let's move to the next question. You are managing a project and are using the salience model to categorize your stakeholders. One of the stakeholders is a regulatory agency that has a significant legal influence over your project but is generally not interested in day to day operations. According to the salience model, how should you classify and manage this stakeholder? All right, this question is a test of salience model. Let me start by a brief introduction to this model. This model categorizes stakeholders based on three attributes. First, power. the ability of a stakeholder to influence the project or its outcomes. Second, urgency. Urgency is the time sensitivity and criticality of the stakeholders' needs. And the last, legitimacy. Legitimacy is the stakeholders' rightful or socially accepted involvement in the project. A combination of these three attributes defines the positioning of any individual stakeholder. Dominant stakeholders have power, but no urgency and legitimacy. Demanding stakeholders have urgency, but lack power and legitimacy. Discretionary stakeholders have legitimacy, but no power and urgency. Dominant stakeholders have both power and legitimacy, but lack urgency. Dangerous stakeholders have power and urgency, but lack legitimacy. Dependent stakeholders have legitimacy and urgency, but lack power. And finally, the stakeholders with highest priority, definitive stakeholders. They have all three: power, legitimacy, and urgency. Now, going back to the question, we are dealing with the regulatory agency. This stakeholder definitely has power and also legitimacy, but it's lacking in urgency, with no interest in day to day operations. Power, yes. Legitimacy, yes. Urgency, no. We are in this area. This stakeholder is a dominant stakeholder. D is our choice. During the planning phase of a construction project, you identify a group of local residents as stakeholders who could be impacted by the project's noise and traffic. What should you do first to manage their expectations? We have identified a new set of stakeholders during early stages, the planning phase of the project. What should we do next to manage their expectations? Let's have a look at the options. A. Prepare a detailed communication plan specifically for these stakeholders to ensure they receive regular updates about the project. Preparing communication plan is important, but is this the first step that the project manager should take after identifying a new stakeholder? I'm not quite sure about this. B. Begin construction and address complaints from the residents as they arise to minimize delays. This is a reactive approach. Instead of minimizing delays, this approach can actually lead to excessive delays due to conflicts at the later stage. Definitely incorrect. C. Include them in your stakeholder register with an assessment of their level of influence and impact, and then develop appropriate engagement strategies. This makes sense. What should we do after we identify a new stakeholder? The first step is to assess their level of influence and impact on the project. This information is captured in the stakeholder register. Once this foundational step is completed, we develop appropriate engagement strategies to address their concerns and expectations. Option A talks about the communication plan. Preparing a communication plan is an important step that should be a part of the engagement strategy. D. Host a public meeting to proactively discuss potential issues, address concerns, and present mitigation plans. Again, this cannot be the step immediately after stakeholders are identified. This will be a part of the engagement strategies mentioned in option C. We drop A and D. C is the correct choice. As a project manager, you are referring to the following stakeholder engagement assessment matrix to evaluate the current C and the desired D engagement levels of your project stakeholders. Based on this matrix, which of the following actions would be the most appropriate to prioritize? I suggest that you pause the video and have a careful look at this stakeholder engagement assessment matrix. So, what do we see here? There are gaps everywhere between the desired and the current engagement levels. The project sponsor is currently supportive, but we want him to be actively involved in taking the project forward. Team members need to move from neutral stance to supportive. External vendors from resistant to neutral, and the regulatory bodies from unaware to neutral. None of the stakeholders are currently at the desired engagement level. All these stakeholders are important. The project manager has to build an engagement strategy to close these gaps. But prioritizing the involvement of the project sponsor from supportive to leading is extremely critical. Project sponsor can have a big influence over other stakeholders. Project sponsor can also enable the support and the resources that the project manager will need for effectively engaging other stakeholders. Project sponsor is our highest priority. With this context, let us now look at the options. A. Organize regular meetings with the project sponsor to increase involvement. Looks good to me. Project sponsor is the focus here. B. Conduct workshops and training for team members about project goals. Important, but not the highest priority. C. Communicate with external vendors to address their concerns. Important again, but still, option A has the highest priority. D. Send briefings and updates to regulatory bodies to ensure they are informed. Important, but lower priority than option A. We drop B, C, and D. A is our choice. You are managing a high profile project within your organization that has multiple senior stakeholders, each with their own interests and influence. You notice that some stakeholders have conflicting interests and have begun lobbying for their preferred outcomes behind the scenes. How should you proceed to ensure the project's success while managing these political dynamics? The stakes are indeed pretty high for this project. High profile project with many senior stakeholders in conflict with each other. Tough situation. What should the project manager do? Our options are: A. Hold a meeting with all senior stakeholders to openly discuss the conflicts and reach a consensus. A meeting with all senior stakeholders discussing the conflicts. This is a high risk move. Open discussion with senior stakeholders is likely to escalate the conflict, and the project manager will be in no position to control the progress of the meeting. B. Privately align with the most influential stakeholder to ensure their support and leverage their influence. Again, this is a high risk strategy. This can potentially alienate other stakeholders. Not good for the project. C. Conduct a stakeholder analysis to understand the political dynamics and develop an engagement strategy. This to me looks like a reasonable approach. Stakeholder analysis will help understand the current situation, and based on the outcome of the analysis, we can develop an engagement strategy. This strategy can then be used to engage the relevant stakeholders. Looks good. D. Ignore the political dynamics and focus solely on the technical aspects of the project. It is unfortunate, but politics within organizations is a reality that cannot be ignored. We reject option D. We also drop A and B. C is our choice. Midway through a project, the project manager notices that some stakeholders are not as engaged or satisfied as expected, which has started to affect the project's progress. To address this, the project manager arranges a brainstorming session with the team to identify gaps between the current and desired level of stakeholder engagement. Following the brainstorming session, a team meeting is scheduled to develop strategies to close these gaps and improve stakeholder satisfaction. These actions of the project manager are mapped to which of the following processes? The options given to us are: A. Identify stakeholders. B. Plan stakeholder engagement. C. Manage stakeholder engagement. D. Monitor stakeholder engagement. All these are processes associated with project stakeholder management. Let us visit the actions that the project manager is currently engaged in. First is the gap analysis. Project manager is trying to identify the gaps between the current and desired level of stakeholder engagement. Second, strategies to close the gaps. Simply speaking, the project manager intends to work on the stakeholder engagement plan. Which process do these actions map to? A. Identify stakeholders. Stakeholder identification and classification are the primary activities under this process. This is not the right choice. B. Plan stakeholder management. The primary goal of this process is to build the stakeholder engagement strategies. The actions in the problem statement. The brainstorming session to identify gaps in stakeholder satisfaction and meetings to close these gaps align quite well to this process. B could be our choice. C. Manage stakeholder engagement. This process covers the execution or the implementation of the plan defined under plan stakeholder management. Developing stakeholder engagement strategies is not a part of this process. We drop C. D. Monitor stakeholder engagement. This is the process where the project manager and the team assess the effectiveness of stakeholder engagement strategies and make necessary adjustments. This could involve identifying gaps between the current level of engagement and what is desired or required for the success of the project. D looks good too. So, we are in a tough spot here. We have two options, B and D, that could be considered correct. But there is a key difference between these two processes: plan stakeholder management and monitor stakeholder management. The difference lies in the timing of the actions. Plan stakeholder engagement typically occurs during the planning phase of the project when we are designing our stakeholder engagement strategies. Monitor stakeholder engagement happens throughout the project and involves ongoing assessment and adjustments to those strategies based on current conditions. In this case, notice that the project is midway and we are already beyond the planning phase. Monitor stakeholder engagement is clearly the better choice. We drop B. D is our choice. John is a project manager in the automotive industry. His project team is responsible for developing a new architecture for next generation autonomous vehicles. Besides the internal stakeholders, John is expected to identify all external stakeholders, including suppliers, government agencies, customers, distributors, and consultants. Which of the following guidelines for identifying stakeholders is incorrect? We have to identify the incorrect statement. A. Some stakeholders are likely to be heavily impacted by the outcome of the project but might still be indifferent to the project. This is the correct statement. Let me give an example. In this case, a new architecture is being developed for autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles, as the name suggests, do not need a driver. Lack of driver means no steering wheel, and no need for the technology and the engineers associated with steering wheels. Some engineers might end up losing their jobs but are still indifferent to the project. This can happen for multiple reasons. Engineers might be skeptical about the success of the project or because they are not aware about the potential impact of the project. Moving to the next option. B. Stakeholder identification and engagement should start as early as possible after the project charter is approved. This is indeed true. Stakeholder identification is critical to the success of any project and should start as early as possible. C. Interest in the success of the project might differ by stakeholders. Some stakeholders may have a positive interest and some may have a negative interest. Absolutely true. Some stakeholders might support the project and others might be against the project. Interest in project differs by stakeholders. D. All the project stakeholders should be identified before the start of the project execution. This is a tricky statement. While it's important to identify as many stakeholders as possible early in the project, stakeholder identification is a continuous process. New stakeholders may be identified, and existing stakeholders' influence or interest may change throughout the project lifecycle. It is incorrect to say that all project stakeholders should be identified before the start of the project execution. This statement is incorrect. We drop A, B, and C. D is our choice. You are leading a brainstorming session to come up with solutions for a production bottleneck. One participant keeps criticizing other people's ideas, which seems to be hindering the flow of creativity. How should you handle the situation to maintain a productive and open environment? A. Ignore the criticism, assuming it will stop gradually. Ignoring the criticism might seem like a simple solution, but it can actually cause more harm than good. We risk creating an environment where participants feel discouraged from sharing their ideas. This defeats the whole purpose of the brainstorming session. Ignoring a problem is never a good idea. Always analyze the problem at hand and then prepare a strategy to fix the problem. A is definitely incorrect. B. Ask the participants to leave the session to avoid further disruptions. This is a drastic step. Asking the participant to leave might solve the immediate problem, but it can also create tension and alienate that individual. This is likely to create problems elsewhere in the project. Option B is incorrect. C. Remind the group of the ground rules, specifically emphasizing that there should be no criticism during the idea generation phase. This is the best approach. By reminding everyone of the ground rules, we reinforce the importance of an open and supportive environment without being harsh to any individual. This helps maintain a positive atmosphere where everyone can participate and contribute freely. Let us check the last option before making our final choice. D. Confront the participant immediately and ask them to stop the behavior. The individual might feel singled out or embarrassed. It is better to handle the situation more diplomatically by reminding the group of the established guidelines, the ground rules. Option C is clearly a better approach. We drop D. C is our choice. You are managing a complex IT project with multiple internal and external stakeholders. During the project execution, you notice that a key stakeholder who has significant power but low interest is becoming increasingly negative about the project. How should you handle the situation? Stakeholder with significant power and a negative attitude is never good. How do we deal with this? Let's look at the options. A. Increase the frequency of project updates to the stakeholder to keep them more informed. Will this really help? No effort is made to understand the reason behind the stakeholders' increasingly negative attitude. Analysis of the situation is missing. Further, remember that we are dealing with a stakeholder with low interest. This stakeholder is unlikely to commit his time for frequent updates. Moving to the next option. B. Reduce engagement with the stakeholder to focus on those with higher interest. Again, the focus here is on action without analysis of the current situation. Low interest of the stakeholder is cited as a reason to reduce engagement. But what about the significant power that the stakeholder has? Reducing the level of engagement with the stakeholder yielding high power can be counterproductive. C. Schedule an one on one meeting to understand and address the concerns. This is an appropriate approach. The meeting is an effort to analyze the situation. Further actions can be decided based on the outcome of this meeting. D. Delegate the responsibility of managing this stakeholder to a team member to free up your time for other tasks. Deprioritizing a stakeholder with significant power is not a good idea. C is definitely a better approach. We drop A, B, and D. C is our choice. Match each stakeholder engagement level with its description by dragging the levels from column A to the corresponding description in column B. This is a drag and drop type of question. During the test, you will need to drag the options from the left column and drop them onto the correct match in the right column. But here, we will do it the traditional way, drawing lines to match both sides. Before I dive into the explanation, I suggest you pause the video, take a look at the question, and try to find the correct matches yourself. Alright, let's work through this question together. We will match each stakeholder engagement level from column A with its appropriate description in column B, step by step. Let's begin with the first engagement level, unaware. This one's pretty straightforward. Think about someone who doesn't even know that the project exists or doesn't understand its impact. If you look at column B, the matching description is lacks awareness about the project's existence and its potential impacts. Stakeholders at this level are not engaged simply because they don't know about the project. Resistant. Now imagine a stakeholder who is against the project for some reason. Maybe they don't agree with the project's objectives or they feel threatened by the changes it might bring. The correct description for this level is opposes the project or its outcomes. Resistance can be a challenge to handle. Recognizing it early is crucial. Neutral. This engagement level is about indifference. These stakeholders are neither for nor against the project. They don't really care about the project. The best match here is indifferent towards the project, neither for nor against it. Neutral stakeholders might not pose a risk, but they are also not helping to push the project forward. Supportive. Supportive stakeholders are those who like the project and want it to succeed, but they are not going out of their way to help make it happen. So, the right description for them is favors the project but does not take an active role in its execution. They are positive about the project, but they are not leading the charge. Leading. Finally, let's talk about those stakeholders who are the project's champions. They are not just supportive, they are actively involved, pushing the project towards success. The description that fits perfectly here is actively participates and champions the project's success. These are the stakeholders you absolutely want on your side. That's it. We are done with this question, and each stakeholder engagement level is now matched with its correct description. You are the project manager for a software development project. Midway through the project, a major regulatory change is announced. which will impact several key stakeholders, including the legal and compliance teams. The project team is concerned about how this change will affect the stakeholder expectations and engagement. You need to reassess the current engagement strategies to address these concerns and update the project documentation accordingly. What is the next step you should take? In the given scenario, a regulatory change is expected to have a major impact on several key stakeholders. This requires a reassessment of how these stakeholders should be engaged. The planned stakeholder engagement process is specifically focused on developing and updating strategies for engaging with stakeholders based on their needs, interests, and potential impact on the project. B should be our choice. Still, let's have a quick look at other options too. A. Identify stakeholders. This process involves identifying stakeholders who may be impacted by the project. However, in this scenario, stakeholders are already identified, and the issue is more about adjusting how they should be engaged. A is incorrect. C. Manage stakeholder engagement. This process involves implementing the stakeholder engagement plan and managing relationships. It would be relevant after revising the plan, not before that. C is dropped too. D. Monitor stakeholder engagement. This process involves tracking stakeholder relationships and making adjustments as needed. It identifies gaps in the agreed upon stakeholder engagement strategy and addresses them. However, in this scenario, the need to update the stakeholder engagement strategy arises due to a significant external change, the regulatory update. Revising the engagement strategies to respond to this change falls under the planned stakeholder engagement process. D is also incorrect. B is our choice. During a software development project, the project manager establishes an ongoing feedback loop with a group of end users who continuously test early versions of the software. Their feedback leads to frequent updates and changes in project priorities. What approach does this scenario illustrate? Alright, let's break this down. We have a software development project where the project manager is keeping a tight feedback loop with the end users. These end users are continuously testing early versions of the software, and their feedback is shaping how the project moves forward. Now, let's go through the options and identify the right one. A. Traditional project management with clear fixed phases. This is definitely incorrect. In the given scenario, the project is constantly evolving based on user feedback. That's not what happens in traditional project management, where everything is carefully planned out from the start, and the project moves through a strict predefined sequence of steps. We drop A. B. Dynamic co-creation, where ongoing collaboration with stakeholders influences project direction. This option looks good to me. Dynamic co-creation is all about continuous collaboration with stakeholders, in this case, the end users. Their feedback is directly influencing the project's direction, causing updates and changes as you go. This approach is flexible and adaptive and matches perfectly with the scenario in the problem statement. C. Waterfall model, focusing on sequential development. The waterfall model is another traditional approach where we complete one phase of the project before moving on to the next, like water flowing down a series of steps. But in the given scenario, the project is not moving in a straight line. It is adjusting based on ongoing feedback. Option C is not the right choice. D. Minimal stakeholder involvement to maintain focus. This is opposite to the scenario described in this question. Stakeholders, the end users, are heavily involved, and their feedback is driving the project's direction. Option D is dropped. Our choice is B. During the execution phase of your project, you receive feedback from a stakeholder that her needs are not being met, despite having been engaged regularly. What is the best course of action to address this issue? So, we have a stakeholder here who has been regularly engaged by the project team. Still, the stakeholder feels that her needs are not being met. What should we do to address this problem? As with any other project related problem, we should first analyze the current situation, identify the gaps, and then work out a strategy to fix those gaps. Let's see if we have any options that aligns with this approach. A. Increase the frequency of stakeholder meetings to address the concerns. Simply increasing the frequency of meetings will not solve the problem. No effort is made to identify the reasons behind the failure of current approach to stakeholder engagement. A is definitely incorrect. B. Review the stakeholder engagement plan to ensure it aligns with stakeholders' expectations and make necessary adjustments. This is good. Regular engagement does not always mean that stakeholder needs are being met. We must review the current stakeholder engagement plan to identify the gaps and then make adjustments to fix those gaps. This is the right approach. C. Dismiss the feedback as the stakeholder has already been engaged regularly. Dismissing the feedback without necessary due diligence is never the right approach. C is incorrect. D. Assign a team member to handle all communications with the stakeholder. This is a passive approach with no effort to identify the root cause of the problem. We drop D. B is our choice. During the execution phase of a healthcare project, the project manager must engage with various stakeholders to ensure the project's success. One key stakeholder is a regulatory agency that provides mandatory approvals and compliance checks for the project. The project manager needs to classify this stakeholder according to its directions of influence. How should the project manager classify the regulatory agency? The options are A. Upward, B. Downward, C. Outward, and D. Sideward. This question is simply testing us on directions of influence. Let me explain the concept. It is a technique used to classify the stakeholders according to their influence on the project. We start with the project manager. He represents the project. Upward stakeholders are those who have significant influence on the project. Could be project sponsors or other senior management and executives. Downward stakeholders are those over which project manager has influence. This could be team members or contractors. Sideward stakeholders are peers to the project manager, functional managers, or other project managers. All three categories, upward, downward, and sideward, are within the confines of the project or the performing organization. Outward, on the other hand, includes external stakeholders, those who are not directly controlled by the project manager but have an interest in the project, such as end users or regulatory bodies. This question is about a regulatory agency. As per the directions of influence framework, regulatory agency is definitely an outward stakeholder. C is our choice. The following communication model is referred to for your ongoing project. If the project is employing aggressive transparency, what is the most appropriate positioning of the project in this communication model? Let's begin with the communication model. On the x-axis, we have the direction of information flow. The terms used here are top-down, bottom-up, and horizontal. Let me clarify what these mean. Top-down refers to the information flowing from leadership to all levels of the organization. Bottom-up is when information flows from team members and lower levels up to the leadership. Horizontal flow involves sharing of information across departments or peers at the same level. Now on the y-axis, we have transparency levels: high, moderate, and low. High transparency means a lot of information is being shared openly. Low transparency means the information is more restricted. Moderate transparency falls somewhere in between these two extremes. Since we are dealing with aggressive transparency, this approach involves comprehensive and open sharing of project information. So we should pick high on the transparency scale. Under aggressive transparency, project information is shared in all directions: top down, bottom up, and horizontally. Therefore, multi-directional information flow with high transparency is the right choice. This project is positioned across cells 1, 4, and 7. D is our choice. Before I move to the next question, let me re-emphasize that aggressive transparency encourages information exchange in all directions: top down, bottom up, and horizontal. It is not limited to horizontal direction. Picking A, high transparency with horizontal flow of information, will be an incorrect choice. After conducting a brainwriting session for your project, you have collected a large number of ideas from team members. What is the next step to ensure these ideas are effectively utilized? We have just finished a brainwriting session for our project and are now sitting on a mountain of ideas. So, what's the best way to move forward with these ideas? Let's walk through each of the options and see what makes the most sense. A. Start working on the implementation of the ideas to show that all contributions are valued and to make quick progress on the project. While it might sound great to show that everyone's input is valued, this approach is impractical and could lead to inefficiencies. Jumping into action without proper evaluation could lead to wasted effort, confusion, and a lack of focus. We need to prioritize and assess the ideas first. This is not the best move. We drop A. B. Compile and categorize the ideas. Then organize a follow-up meeting with the team to discuss and evaluate each idea based on feasibility, impact, and alignment with project goals. Looks good to me. The most effective approach after a brainwriting session is to organize the ideas and then engage the team in a structured evaluation process. This ensures that all ideas are considered and assessed based on their potential impact and feasibility. Involving the team is important. It promotes collaboration and buy-in, which is critical for successful project implementation. C. Select the ideas that seem most feasible to you as the project manager and move forward with implementing them. Selecting ideas without inputs from the team is not a good approach. It bypasses valuable perspectives and could result in suboptimal choices. We drop C. D. Discard the ideas if they do not seem immediately useful and initiate a new brainstorming session to generate fresh perspectives and solutions. Throwing away potentially good ideas without even evaluating them could mean missing out on great opportunities. This also undermines the effort put into generating them and could also demotivate the team. D is definitely incorrect. Our choice is B. Match each stakeholder analysis technique with its description by dragging the techniques from column A to the corresponding description in column B. This is a drag and drop type of question. We will do it the traditional way, drawing lines to match both sides. I suggest you pause the video, take a look at the question, and try to find the correct matches yourself. Alright, let's work through this question together. We will match each technique from column A with its appropriate description in column B, step by step. Starting with Power Interest Grid. The Power Interest Grid is a visual tool that categorizes stakeholders based on two dimensions: their level of authority, which is power, and their concern or interest in the project. So, the right match for Power Interest Grid is the top description. Visual tool that categorizes stakeholders based on their level of authority and concern. Moving on to the stakeholder cube. The stakeholder cube is a bit more complex. It's a three-dimensional model that combines various attributes like power, interest, and engagement levels to categorize stakeholders. Stakeholder cube can be matched with the description. Three-dimensional model that combines various attributes to categorize stakeholders. Before we continue, I would like to point out that the additional third dimension in the stakeholder cube makes it a more comprehensive tool compared to Power Interest Grid technique. Now to Salience model. The Salience model is a framework that evaluates stakeholders based on three criteria: power, urgency, and legitimacy. The correct match here is framework that considers multiple dimensions such as power, urgency, and legitimacy. Next is Influence Impact Grid. This tool categorizes stakeholders based on their influence, ability to affect the project, and impact, how much the project affects them. It's another simple yet effective way to manage stakeholders. So, the Influence Impact Grid matches with categorizes stakeholders based on their ability to affect the project and the effect the project will have on them. Finally, Stakeholder Engagement Assessment Matrix. This technique is used to visually represent the current and desired engagement levels of stakeholders. It's often used to monitor and adjust strategies for managing stakeholders. The best match for this is visual representation of current and desired stakeholder engagement levels. With this, we are done with this question. Each stakeholder analysis technique is now matched with its correct description. Your project has recently undergone a significant scope change due to a major shift in customer requirements. This change is likely to alter the impact on current stakeholders and may introduce new stakeholders to the project. What is the best first step to take? So, we have a major scope change. This can indeed introduce new stakeholders and also have an impact on existing stakeholders. How do we deal with this situation? Let's look at the options. A. Immediately inform all stakeholders about the scope change through an email update. Informing stakeholders is important, but what about identifying the new stakeholders? This option is most likely incorrect. B. Conduct a stakeholder analysis to reassess the influence and interest level of each stakeholder. Sounds reasonable. Stakeholder analysis will help us understand any shifts in the influence and the interest levels of each stakeholder. But again, there is no explicit reference to identifying new stakeholders. I'm not sure about this option. C. Re-identify and analyze the stakeholders to ensure the current list is complete and updated. This looks good to me. The first step should be to re-identify stakeholders. All relevant parties who may be impacted by or interested in the project after the scope change should be identified and listed. This is usually followed by a comprehensive stakeholder assessment, stakeholder classification, and then the development of an appropriate stakeholder engagement plan. D. Update the project management plan to reflect the new scope and inform the project team. This is a necessary step, but will not be the best first step in the given situation. This comes after ensuring the stakeholder list is accurate and complete. We drop A, B, and D. C is our choice. You are leading a project team meeting to identify potential project stakeholders, both internal and external. You have noticed that some team members, particularly those who are more introverted, are not actively participating in the verbal discussions. Which technique is likely to be more effective in ensuring that you gather inputs from these team members? All right, so we have some stakeholders who are introverts, and our goal is to make sure that all stakeholders, including those who are not so vocal, contribute to the discussion. Which technique should we use? Options are A. Brainstorming. Brainstorming is a group discussion technique where participants verbally share their ideas and views in an open, free flowing environment. It is quite a popular technique, but might not be an ideal choice while dealing with introverted members. Those who are more reserved might hesitate to speak up and their opinion might get overlooked. I am not very confident about this choice. B. Open forum. Just like brainstorming, this is also a structured discussion where participants are encouraged to speak up and share their thoughts. Not ideal for introverted participants. C. Brainwriting. Brainwriting is a technique where participants write down their ideas individually and then share them with the group. This method allows introverted participants to contribute their thoughts without the pressure of speaking up in the group setting. This is certainly an effective technique for our situation. Still, let us look at the last choice before making the final decision. D. Mind mapping. Mind mapping is a data representation technique that is used to visually organize and connect ideas. However, in this situation, what we need is an effective data gathering technique that encourages participation from all stakeholders, including those who are more introverted. D is definitely incorrect. We drop A. C is our choice. During a brainstorming session aimed at developing a new marketing campaign, one idea sparks a lot of excitement, and the group wants to dive deep into discussing it immediately. What should you do to maintain the effectiveness of the brainstorming session? Brainstorming session and one exciting idea. What should we do? A. Allow the group to discuss the exciting idea in detail right away, as it may lead to immediate valuable insights. The objective of a brainstorming session is to generate as many ideas as possible. Allowing detailed discussion immediately could derail the process and limit the generation of other ideas. A might not be the right choice. B. Acknowledge the excitement. Note the idea for later discussion and continue with the brainstorming session. This approach ensures that the session remains focused on idea generation and that all potential ideas are captured without losing momentum. Remember, acknowledging the excitement is important for maintaining the team morale. B looks good to me. C. End the brainstorming session and schedule a new meeting to focus exclusively on the exciting idea, ensuring it gets the attention it deserves. No, ending the brainstorming session abruptly defeats the primary objective of generating as many ideas as possible. Not a good approach. D. Discourage further discussion of the idea to avoid distractions and keep the session focused on generating a wide range of ideas. Continuing with idea generation is good, but discouraging the team is not the right approach. This will dampen the enthusiasm of the participants and hamper the generation of more ideas. As suggested in option B, acknowledgement of the excitement is important, while also ensuring that the team continues with the idea generation activity. We drop A, C, and D. B is our choice. After completing the stakeholder analysis, you realize that one of the key stakeholders has low interest but high influence on the project. What strategy should you use to manage this stakeholder? Before moving to the options, let us look at the key characteristics of this stakeholder. First, low interest. Low interest stakeholders do not wish to actively involve in the project. They prefer minimal engagement. Second is high influence. High influence means the power to make a big impact on the project. Support from high influence stakeholders is absolutely critical. Project manager has to keep them satisfied and positive about the project. Let's now look at the options. A. Keep the stakeholder satisfied by regularly informing them about important project decisions. The strategy here is to have regular communication with this stakeholder. This is important while dealing with high influence stakeholder. And also, limit the information only to important decisions. There is a clear effort to avoid flooding the stakeholder with information. Works well with low interest stakeholder. Option A looks good to me. B. Minimize communication with the stakeholder to avoid unnecessary conflicts. Not a good approach. Minimizing communication is a risky strategy. High influence stakeholders should be regularly engaged. This helps make sure that their feedback and concerns are understood early, allowing for timely actions to address any issues and maintain their support for the project. C. Involve the stakeholder in every project meeting to keep them engaged. This is simply too much communication. A low interest stakeholder might not be willing to commit time and energy for such intense engagement. Not the right choice. D. Ignore the stakeholder's influence due to his or her low interest in the project. Ignoring is never the right choice. In this case, even though the stakeholder has low interest, the stakeholder yields high influence. This aspect is not considered in this option. We drop D. A is our choice. As a project manager, you are keen on ensuring that the stakeholder engagement plan is updated regularly and captures all changes in the stakeholder community. Which of the following situations is least likely to trigger a change in the stakeholder engagement plan? Let's look at each option and find the option that is least likely to trigger a change in the stakeholder engagement plan. A. Completion of a project phase and entry into the next phase. Moving from one phase to another often brings new stakeholders or changes the involvement of existing ones. So it is usual to revisit and possibly update the stakeholder engagement plan during phase changes. A is likely to be incorrect. B. Changes in the organization structure after the quarterly business review by the board of directors. This is another strong candidate for triggering a change. A shake-up in the organization can definitely alter who the key stakeholders are or how they interact with your project. So the plan might need an update. B doesn't look like a good choice. C. The project scope is revised in agreement with the customer, resulting in additional deliverables at a new milestone. This situation is almost certain to require changes in the stakeholder engagement plan. If the scope changes, new stakeholders might be impacted, or existing ones might have different expectations. So, updating the plan is a must. C is quite unlikely to be our choice. D. You meet the project sponsor once in 2 weeks, but the project sponsor requests for weekly meetings. Now, this one is different. While the frequency of your meetings is changing, it doesn't mean that the stakeholder engagement plan has to be changed. It is just a minor adjustment to the communication plan. So this situation is least likely to require an update to the stakeholder engagement plan. We drop A, B, and C. D is our choice. A project manager is leading a new product development project. The project team includes designers, engineers, and marketing professionals. The project manager decides to involve key customers in the brainstorming sessions to gather their ideas and preferences directly. What project management strategy is being employed here, and what is its primary benefit? Let's walk through each option and identify the project management strategy being used and its primary benefit. A. Market research. It helps in understanding the market trends. This option isn't quite right. Market research involves collecting data and insights about the broader market, usually through surveys, interviews, or data analysis. The focus of market research usually is on data collection, not direct collaboration. So, we can eliminate A. B. Co-creation. It ensures the final product better meets customer needs. This definitely is a strong contender. Co-creation is all about involving key stakeholders, like customers, in the development process to ensure that their needs and preferences are directly reflected in the final product. This option looks good. C. Stakeholder engagement. It is a good practice to involve stakeholders. It's true that involving stakeholders is a part of stakeholder engagement, but this option is a bit too generic. It fails to specifically capture the idea of directly co-creating the product with the customers. So, we can safely drop C. Option D, Agile development. It focuses on iterative improvements. Agile is all about iterative development and responding to the changes quickly. Agile team often focus on incremental work and regular feedback. But again, this option doesn't specifically capture the direct involvement of customers in product development. Therefore, D is also dropped. Our choice is B. You are a project manager for a software development project that has just kicked off. During an internal stakeholder meeting, you notice that participants are frequently interrupting each other and some are engaged in side conversations. To address this issue and ensure a productive working environment, what would be the most appropriate action at this stage? Let's look at the options. A. Schedule a series of conflict resolution workshops to address potential disagreements among team members. Conflict resolution workshop. Will this help? Maybe not. This might not address the fundamental problem of stakeholders not following the basic principles of communication, not interrupting when others are presenting their views, and not disturbing the flow of the meeting with side conversations. B. Develop a detailed communication plan outlining specific channels and frequencies for all project communications. This might help, but the approach still seems to be avoiding the real problem. Stakeholders neglecting the basic guidelines on communication. I'm not sure about this option. C. Collaborate with the team to create a team charter that includes agreed upon ground rules for meeting conduct, communication, and behavior. Ground rules. This, to me, is the right approach. The question makes it clear that the project has just started. It is the right time for defining the ground rules for conduct and behavior. This approach directly addresses the problem of poor behavior during the meetings. This seems to be a good choice. D. Conduct individual one-on-one meetings with each team member to understand their concerns and preferences for communication. Again, the fundamental problem is ignored here. This can be done as a part of the process to define the ground rules. But one-on-one by itself will not help solve the problem. C is definitely a better choice. We drop A, B, and D. C is our choice. As a project manager for a large infrastructure project, you have decided to publish all project plans, timelines, budgets, and risk assessments on a publicly accessible website. This decision includes making the information available to all stakeholders, including the general public. The goal is to foster trust through open communication and ensure accountability. What is this approach called? And what is the potential risk associated with it? So, we have the project information on a public website. Anyone, even the general public, can access this information. This is a clear push towards absolute transparency. We have a term for this approach. It is called aggressive transparency. Do we have this as one of the options? Yes, we do. Option D is aggressive transparency. What about the risks associated with aggressive transparency? Aggressive transparency can lead to unintentional disclosure of sensitive information. This is indeed a risk. Correct again. Before we move further, let's have a quick look at other options too. A. Stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement is a generic term that fails to explain the focus on transparency in this case. The risk of overwhelming stakeholders with information is true though. This can happen with aggressive transparency. Too much information can sometimes be counterproductive. B. Co-creation. This term refers to close engagement with various stakeholders to create value for the project. Feedback is sought and used to develop products and solutions. The situation mentioned in this question is quite different. The focus is on sharing project information with the stakeholders, not on securing feedback. Co-creation is incorrect. Moving to the risk. The risk of stakeholders misinterpreting data is always there. It is more when excessive amount of information is shared with stakeholders. The second part of this option is correct. C. Dynamic co-creation. It is an extension of co-creation where the stakeholders are engaged continually. It is a real-time engagement with the stakeholders that supports iterative adaptations to changing needs and conditions. Not a right choice in our case. Moving to risk. Risk of excessive stakeholder engagement. This can happen with dynamic co-creation but not quite relevant to the current situation. Making all project information available to the stakeholders does not directly equate to excessive stakeholder engagement. We drop A, B, and C. D is our choice. This was our last question. How many did you get right? Don't worry, this was not a test. But it will still be good to know where you stand with your preparations. A score of 10 or less, you are a beginner. First step is always important. 11 to 15, you are a rising star. Keep pushing. Score of 16 to 20, you are almost there, at the brink of success. Score of 21 and more, you are a champion. Keep practicing and stay on the top. If you enjoyed this lesson, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel and leave a comment below. I would love to hear from you. Thank you and see you again soon.